I will say up front that capitalism is dying. It is dying of its own contradictions, and much of our job is to make sure that it doesn't kill all of us as it goes on the way to the cemetery. In terms of looking forward and what we need to do, I'm going to address that in encapsulated fashion as well. Number one, of course, we need a mass movement. But we have been without a movement for so long that people do not even have a memory of what it was to have a movement, to have people arguing so intensely that sometimes it came to gunfire about what direction black people were going to take. Now, of course, we're not advocating that black folks turn their guns on each other, but the intensity of the argument that many of us are old enough to have experienced was a mark of a mature and healthy black polity. The kind of non-dialogue that we see going on now, it seems to be a repeat of catchphrases and talking points that folks get from CNN and MSNBC. That is no political dialogue whatsoever, and it shows a very unhealthy society. A couple of years back, I had a debate with Michael Eric Dyson on Democracy Now! And Dyson kept on saying something strange. He said, you got to be in the game. You got to be in the game. And it became very clear that he and other black misleadership class members think that this is a game in a real sense. They look at struggle not as something that masses of people join in order to effectuate change for the betterment of the entire group. They look at struggle as something that is individual. It is maneuvering by them and their buddies and whoever they can get into some kind of conspiracy for mobility with, maneuvering for position, maneuvering for advantage. And in that kind of game, as they see it, we are all just pawns. And that explains their political behavior. So the number two thing that we must do, and I do think this leads to that, is to break with the Democratic Party. Because this is the vehicle in which they play those games. And that game, like a game of Monopoly, it's dominated by the bank. And in this case, in the Democratic Party, literally by the banks. This is nothing new, the Democratic Party's relationship to finance capital. For a very long time, the Wall Street has been to the Democratic Party what big energy, Texaco and Exxon, have been to the Republican Party. And that intimate relationship has done nothing but intensify in recent years, and especially under Obama, who is the perfect servant of Wall Street. Save their butt. Remember that George Bush's bailout failed on the Monday when it came up for a vote in October. It took the shining knight candidate, Barack Obama, to fly in, to suspend his campaign and fly in and talk to Democrats, and by Friday that vote was reversed. Barack Obama saved the banks. They know it and he knows it, and he will be rewarded in his after presidential life expensively for it. The third point, I think, is that we have to organize against the banks, that as the main enemy. And this is not part of some political game. I don't think it is something that's done for strategic reasons solely, but because the banks are the enemy. The enemy of the world is concentrated finance capital. Concentrated finance capital now totally dominates manufacturing capital. When I was a kid, people used to say, what's good for General Motors, this giant manufacturing company, is good for the country. It wasn't true then, but it had validity in the sense that General Motors, big manufacturing, was in the catbird seat in terms of political influence, but also in terms of the United States being the greatest industrial power in the world at that time. Now all of the manufacturing industries are totally subordinate, are owned by, are just parcels to be bought and sold by big capital. So capital is the enemy, but strategically speaking, I think it is the best approach in terms of building a mass movement that is multiracial as well, to target the banks, because everybody hates the banks. Everybody hates the banks. And I firmly believe that if the Occupy Wall Street movement had articulated a position of decapitation of the banks, rather than just sloganizing and getting people to feel badly about the banks. People didn't really need to be coaxed and urged to feel badly about the banks. They want to hear how we can get rid of them. And that's the way I believe towards a movement. But the discussion, the theme of the evening was the Black Misleadership class. And I got much of my political education from reading the volumes of Herbert Aptheker, who dedicated much of his life to creating the multi-volume History of the Negro in the United States. And it is a treasure because Aptheker did not intrude on the documents that he amassed. He acted as an editor, and he put them in the proper order. And there was a world of information on Black political life historically in there. If you read it from cover to cover, you read it over and over again. And I remember a little vignette from a document that he found. It came from 1890s New Orleans. And the center of the document was a petition that had been circulated by a Negro group of the day composed of upwardly mobile strivers, the better class of colored folks in New Orleans. And they were petitioning the white mayor. Remember, Reconstruction is long gone in New Orleans by this time. They were petitioning the white mayor not to allow the female prisoners from the city jail to clean the streets in daylight. If they were going to clean the streets, have them do it at night. Now, you might think that their concern was for the conditions of these women prisoners, almost all of whom were Black. But that was not their concern. Their concern was that these prisoners cleaning the streets in daylight made the better class of colored folks look bad. And that was the Black Misleadership class of New Orleans in 1890. They didn't give a damn about those women who might rather be out in the sunlight than in the dungeons that New Orleans prisons were during that time. Or maybe they wouldn't, but these good colored folks of the era were not concerned about these female inmates' opinion. They were concerned about their own image. And we have those same kinds of jerks in control of our political community today. We at Black Agenda Report believe that the two greatest challenges, domestically certainly, to Black people in this country are gentrification and mass incarceration. Mass incarceration obviously has deformed and disfigured our communities so that it becomes much, much more difficult to organize for liberation. And we could go on forever about the sins of mass incarceration. Gentrification is a threat to our ability to organize in concentrated numbers. And the window on the black city is rapidly closing. We don't have much time left before the whole issue of what do you do with Chocolate City becomes moot, because there won't be anymore. So how has the black misleadership class dealt with those two, we believe, greatest challenges? Let's talk about mass incarceration first. Most folks don't know that when that 100-to-1 crack cocaine bill was passed in 1986, half of the Congressional Black Caucus voted for it. And about half of those who voted for it are still there. But they don't fess up to that, that they were part of the whole hysteria that was whipped up by the Reagan administration about a crack epidemic that had, in the early 80s, not yet fully formed. As Michelle Alexander explained in The New Jim Crow, the whole effort to create the anti-crack hysteria was, as always it is, in order to make black folks the scapegoat for whatever was wrong with the country. But we see that these black politicians in the caucus were willing actors in this whole charade that resulted in a bill that put hundreds of thousands of black people behind bars for decades. That's the kind of behavior that we get from them. I've concluded that this black misleadership class is more ashamed, just as those New Orleans good colored folk were, more ashamed about mass incarceration than outraged. And that's why they are not to be trusted in any movement to abolish this horrible penal system that we have. In terms of gentrification, gentrification could not be proceeding at the pace that we see it now were it not for the active collaboration of the black political class. I remember in DC about 15 years ago, the black mayor announced quite openly and without fear of any political retaliation that the city should prepare, pave the way for, open its arms to 200,000 new upscale residents. Now, who did that mean? They're talking about white people. Here we have a black mayor who is openly advocating policies that would make DC a non-black majority city. And today, DC is a non-black majority city. In Atlanta, Bruce was talking about the Olympics and how it was welcomed as some kind of great victory for this progressive black-run city. But of course, the net result was to further decrease the black majority, which I think is now just a little bit over 50%, and Atlanta will soon lose its majority. Ray Nagin, it's called ethnic cleansing, and Ray Nagin in New Orleans, the last black mayor. Some people did not become familiar with him until Katrina, and may have felt some kind of empathy for him. But he was the business and the white population's candidate for mayor of New Orleans, and did everything he could to drive poor folks out of town. Very difficult thing to do in a 70% city, black city like New Orleans was. And then Katrina came along and did much of the job for him. And now New Orleans has a white business mayor. So these people are useless. And although it's fun for some of us to make fun of them and to call into question their character and to talk about their mama if we could, the worst thing about the black misleadership class is that they are absolutely useless to us, but their presence is quite useful to the real rulers, the banks. Thank you.